Still, the weight of my overnight bag pulled at my hand as my son's front door opened and his smile didn't reach his eyes. As I stepped inside, I kept my voice steady, pretending not to notice how he didn't offer to take the bag. While the leather strap cut into my palm, the house stayed quiet, expensive, and strangely unwelcoming. The same pressure followed me as I realized he was already calculating what my arrival might cost him. That's when it hit me that the $50 million hadn't changed his life. It had revealed it. Still holding my bag, I decided to let him show me exactly who he thought I was worth. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The front gates loomed taller than I remembered. Sleek black metal framed by white stone pillars, adorned with subtle gold accents. Expensive, impersonal, like everything Ethan had built around himself. I sat in the back of the town car, gripping the leather handle of my overnight bag. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror, unsure if he should proceed. "Pull in," I said quietly, more to myself than to him. The gates opened slowly, revealing a long, curved driveway lined with manicured hedges and spotless pavers. Ethan's house, no, estate, sat like a monument to ambition. 3 stories, limestone facade, modern glass railings that overlooked the bay. The kind of place meant to impress strangers, not welcome family. I stepped out of the car and inhaled the humid Miami air, salt and flowers. I hadn't told him I was coming. That was the point. If he truly cared, it wouldn't matter. The door opened before I reached it. Ethan stood in the entryway, tall and trim in his custom-fitted polo and pressed slacks. His face froze for a half second when he saw me, then reshaped itself into something polite, distant. "Mom," he said flatly, "this is unexpected." I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "I thought I'd surprise you, just for a few days. I was in town handling the estate." He glanced behind him as though someone else might be there to deal with this. "You could have called." "I wanted to see your reaction." There was a pause, just long enough for it to sting. He didn't reach for my bag. Instead, he stepped aside. "Come in." The house was immaculate. Cold marble floors, vaulted ceilings, white walls with abstract art that probably cost a fortune and meant nothing. I followed him through the foyer into a sitting room with too many sharp edges and not a single family photo. "I assume Sarah's out?" I asked, setting my bag gently on the floor. "She's in Aspen." "Charity thing," he replied, checking his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. "She'll be back next week." "And you? Any chance I caught you at a good time?" He chuckled dryly, but there was no humor in it. "It's never really a good time, Mom. You know how things are." I sat on the edge of a cream leather sofa, hands folded neatly in my lap. "I'll just stay the night. I won't get in your way." He didn't respond right away. He crossed to the bar cart and poured himself a whiskey. At 3 p.m, no offer made to me. "I wasn't really planning to host anyone this weekend," he said. "Got a lot going on." I figured, but sometimes plans change. He took a sip, avoiding eye contact. "You sure you wouldn't be more comfortable at the Ritz or something? I can book it for you." I looked up at him slowly. I didn't come for room service. Silence stretched thin between us. My phone buzzed. Clara. I stepped into the hallway to answer. "You told him?" she asked immediately. "I showed up with my bags," I replied, a sigh from her end. "Charlotte, you sure you want to do this?" "He needs to be tested. You saw what he said in that email, calling the inheritance a windfall for expansion. No mention of family, no thank you. Just money. He's not going to take this well. That's exactly the point." I hung up and returned to find Ethan still standing, drink in hand, jaw clenched. "Guest room's upstairs, last door on the right," he muttered. I retrieved my bag and moved toward the stairs. The air felt heavier now, like the house itself resented my presence. At the landing, I paused. "Thank you, Ethan." He didn't look at me, just swirled the amber liquid in his glass and said flatly, "You can't just show up unannounced." Morning light streamed through the gauzy white curtains, painting the guest room in gold and dust. The air smelled faintly of ocean breeze and lemon wood polish. I'd barely slept. Too much silence. Too much space. Ethan's house was beautiful, but it felt like being trapped inside a jewelry box. Cold, expensive, and locked shut. I dressed in a pale blue cardigan and linen slacks, soft things I'd worn countless times before. I wasn't here to impress. I was here to find out who my son had become when no one was watching. Downstairs, Ethan was already in his home office. The glass doors opened just enough to see him pacing with his phone wedged between shoulder and ear. "No, move the assets. Don't wait for confirmation. I said expedite it," he snapped, before turning and catching sight of me. His tone didn't change. "We'll circle back after lunch. Make it clean." He ended the call and gestured toward the kitchen with his chin. "Coffee's on the island. I have a 10 a.m. I poured myself a cup, the sound of ceramic on marble sounding too loud in the quiet. He didn't ask how I'd slept, didn't sit, didn't offer me breakfast. Just hovered, arms crossed, as if waiting for me to finish what I came to say. So I did. "I need your help, Ethan." His brow twitched. "With what?" "I'm facing some liquidity issues. Nothing catastrophic, just short term." I sipped my coffee slowly. "It'd be easier to manage with a small loan. 50,000 should cover it." He blinked. "You need me to loan you money?" I met his eyes. "I wouldn't ask if it weren't necessary." He paced a tight circle, rubbing the back of his neck. "I mean, Mom, this is kind of out of the blue." I said nothing. I wanted to see what would happen when silence did the pressing. "I've got deals in motion," he continued. "Capital tied up. I'd have to liquidate something, which isn't ideal. Maybe in a few weeks. A few weeks won't help." He opened his mouth, then closed it. His discomfort was loud, even in the quiet. I let a pause settle between us. "It's not a gift, Ethan. I'd repay it." He exhaled through his nose, then checked his phone as if looking for a way out. Right on cue, it buzzed. He glanced down. "It's Sarah." His whole posture shifted as he answered. Voice softened, smile in his tone. "Hey, babe. Yeah, I miss you too." He walked out onto the patio, private now. I stood there with my coffee cooling in my hand, listening to the muffled hum of his voice sweetening for someone else. When he returned, he was still smiling, but it faded the second he saw me. "She says hi," he offered flatly. "Charming." He didn't catch the sarcasm. "Look, I'll talk to my guy, see what I can do. Maybe shuffle some things, but no promises." I nodded once. "It's not that complicated, Ethan. I'm asking my son for help." He sat heavily on a stool at the kitchen island and rubbed his temples like I was a migraine. "This just isn't a good time." "That's what you said yesterday." He stared at the counter. "I'm not saying no, I'm just overwhelmed." "I raised you better than this." My voice was calm, but under it, disappointment surged like a rip current. "I'm not some stranger walking in off the street." His eyes flicked to mine. Guilt, or maybe just irritation. "Would you help if I were a stranger?" I asked, setting the cup down with finality. His mouth opened, but no answer came, and in that silence, I had my first answer. The next morning, Ethan didn't speak to me. I heard him leave through the garage, the heavy engine of his Mercedes starting with a purr and disappearing down the drive. No note, no update, just absence. I sat alone on the sun-drenched patio with a cup of bitter hotel-grade coffee from the machine I had to figure out myself. A hummingbird hovered near a potted hibiscus, its wings frantic, focused, purposeful. So unlike Ethan, who'd left without asking if I needed anything. On a side table sat yesterday's paper. I flipped it open out of habit, but it wasn't the news that caught my attention. It was the framed photo behind it. Ethan and Sarah posed in front of a private jet, both wearing matching ivory. Her hand rested lightly on his chest. His Rolex gleamed in the sunlight. It was all teeth and status. Not a single photo of me in the house. My phone buzzed. Sarah Winters. Saw your text. Ethan's just swamped. Don't take it personally. I hadn't texted her. I stared at the screen, rereading the message. She wanted to be seen as gracious, polished, above tension. But her words felt like a sweep of a hand brushing away crumbs. Me being the crumb. Ethan returned that evening just before sunset. His sleeves were rolled up, hair disheveled like he'd run his fingers through it too many times. He barely noticed me sitting in the reading nook by the bay window. "Long day?" I asked quietly. "Insane," he muttered, tossing his keys onto the counter. "I had to bail on the Bennett's baby shower. Sarah's furious." "Family event?" I asked. Sarah's side doesn't matter. I had a lunch with a hedge fund partner, worth 5 times more. That stung in a place I couldn't quite name. He poured himself a drink and leaned on the island, scrolling through emails. "Did you hear about Aunt Linda?" I asked, testing him. "She had another fall, broke her hip this time." He didn't even look up. "She's the one in Sarasota, right? She raised you every summer until you were 12. "Right. Well, you should probably check in on that." "I already did. I thought maybe you'd want to call her too." He shrugged. "Sure. Maybe when things calm down." Things never calmed down with Ethan. He was always sprinting toward the next thing, next deal, next dollar, next status symbol. But family? That didn't register anymore. Later that night, I curled into bed with a glass of water and called Paul. He answered on the second ring. "Charlotte," he said, voice warm. "You okay?" "I don't know," I said. "I keep telling myself this is just who he is under pressure, that it's temporary." Paul sighed. "Pressure doesn't create character. It reveals it." I asked him for help. Silence on his end, patient and intentional. "He dodged it," I continued. "Said he's busy, said he'd try, but it was like I was negotiating with a stranger, not my son." "You didn't tell him about the inheritance yet?" "No, that would change the test." Paul paused, then said gently, "You're walking a thin line, Charlotte. Be careful it doesn't cut you." I ended the call but didn't sleep. I sat for hours in the dark, the ocean breeze stirring the sheer curtains. Below, I could hear the distant hum of Ethan's TV, some finance documentary, the narrator droning on about leverage and legacy and exponential wealth. None of it had room for me in it. At midnight, I opened my notebook, the one I kept for estate planning, tucked behind a false panel in my bag, and turned to a blank page. I stared at the clean lines for a long time before writing, in steady hand, "I need to know if he's really my son." The call came just after noon, when the heat pressed against the windows, and the house lay quiet in that expensive, curated way Ethan preferred. I stood in the kitchen, phone to my ear, listening as the property manager explained the issue for the second time, measured, apologetic, unmoved. "It's a permitting problem," he said. "Without the guarantor's signature, the sale stalls. We need someone local with authority to step in." Authority, proximity, time, all things Ethan had. I ended the call and stared at the marble island, tracing a faint crack in the stone that looked like a fault line. This wasn't about money now. It was paperwork, a signature, a single meeting downtown, an hour, maybe 2, a son's errand. Ethan was in his office again, the glass door shut but not opaque. I knocked once and stepped in anyway. "I need something," I said. He didn't look up. "Can it wait?" "No." He sighed and leaned back, fingers steepled. "Okay, what is it?" "There's an issue with a property sale tied to the estate. I need a local guarantor to meet with the city this afternoon. It's routine. You could handle it." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Today?" "Yes." He laughed, short, disbelieving. "Mom, I'm slammed. I've got calls back to back, a dinner tonight and a flight early tomorrow. It won't take long." "That's not the point." He checked his calendar, then his phone. "This is exactly what I mean about timing." I waited for him to offer an alternative, to say he'd rearrange something, to ask questions. Instead, he said, "Can't Clara do it?" "She's in Tampa." "Then reschedule." It can't be rescheduled. He pushed his chair back, standing now, agitation sharp in his movements. You're asking me to drop everything. I'm asking you to help. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was seeing a problem to be managed. I just don't have the bandwidth. The words landed heavy. Bandwidth. As if love were a data plan. Sarah's voice floated in from the hallway before I could respond. She was on speaker, breezing through the house. Ethan? Babe? I forgot to tell you. Mrs. Klein loved the seating chart idea. Ethan's face softened instantly. He smiled without thinking. Told you it'd work. I stepped back, suddenly invisible again. Sarah appeared in the doorway, phone still in hand. Oh, Charlotte. Hi. Her smile was practiced, sympathetic. Ethan told me you're having some stress with the estate. I'm so sorry. She said it the way people apologize for bad weather. It's manageable, I replied. Well, that's good, she said brightly. These things can be so draining. Ethan really needs to stay focused right now. This quarter is huge for him. She kissed his cheek and disappeared back down the hall, already mid-sentence with someone else. Ethan didn't even notice the shift back to quiet. That's what I'm dealing with, he said. High stakes. I nodded slowly. I see that. That evening, I called Clara from the guest room, the bay outside turning copper with sunset. He won't do it, I said simply. Clara was quiet for a moment. That tells you something. Or it tells me I'm asking the wrong way. Charlotte. I know, I interrupted. I hear you. I keep waiting for him to offer, to step up without being asked. You may be waiting a long time. After the call, I packed my bag, not to leave, but to remind myself I could. I folded each item carefully, methodical, calm, the way I used to be when I made hard decisions. Downstairs, Ethan laughed into his phone, the sound echoing up the staircase. I paused, hand on the railing, and felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not grief, resolve. If he wouldn't offer help freely, I would stop asking plainly. I returned to my room and opened my notebook again. This time, I didn't write a question. I wrote a plan. It was a quiet Wednesday morning, thick with the weight of unfinished things. The bay was still, save for the occasional ripple from a distant boat. I stood barefoot in Ethan's kitchen, staring out the window with my notebook tucked beneath my arm. Pages filled, edges worn soft from hours of thought. He came in late, tieless, sipping something green from a glass bottle. I waited until he tossed his keys on the counter and opened his laptop, half turned toward me but already distracted. I have a proposition, I said. He paused, looked up with mild curiosity. I'm listening. I want to give you a portion of my portfolio, just to manage. I spoke calmly, deliberately. Not a handout, a test. That got his attention. He straightened, set the bottle down. How much are we talking? I watched his reaction closely. $2 million, invested however you choose. If you grow it with integrity, it stays in your hands. His eyes sparked, not with gratitude, but calculation. And if I don't grow it? He asked, tone light but probing. Then I take it back. Simple. He leaned forward on his elbows like we were equals negotiating at a boardroom table. What are the rules? Transparency, monthly reports, nothing shady. I want to see how you lead when no one's watching. His smile came slowly, stretching too far. You won't regret this. But even as he said it, his mind had already moved on. I could see it in the way he pulled out his phone and began typing notes to himself, muttering timelines, partnerships, returns. He didn't ask why I was offering it. He didn't ask what I needed, only how soon he could begin. That night, he stayed up late in his office. I heard the click of his mouse, the buzz of calls, the low hum of financial ambition. He didn't knock on my door, didn't say goodnight. He'd gotten what he wanted. The next morning, an email landed in my inbox with the subject line, Phase 1, Diversification Strategy. Attached was a 17-slide deck with projections, brand names, real estate flips, crypto funds, and offshore accounts. Nothing about risk, nothing about ethics, just momentum. Clara called shortly after. "You what?" she said, sharp enough to cut through static. "I gave him a portion of the funds," I replied, standing barefoot in the hallway. "It's not permanent." "You just handed him ammunition, Charlotte." "It's leverage," I said, trying to believe it. "It's bait," she snapped, "and he's already swallowed it." She wasn't wrong. Over the next few days, Ethan's behavior shifted. He stopped pretending to be annoyed with my presence. Now, he made jokes in passing, poured me a coffee once, and even invited me to a meeting, though he spent the entire time talking over me. "Think of this as a legacy project," he said over dinner one night, swirling his wine. "You'll see, Mom. This isn't just money. This is positioning." "For whom?" I asked. "For us," he said smoothly. But I knew better. By Friday, he'd requested access to other assets. Just temporary oversight, he'd said. For efficiency. For scale. He wanted a seat at the table. And a key to the vault. I didn't answer right away. I took the file to my room, closed the door, and let the weight of it settle into my hands. It wasn't about helping anymore. He wanted control. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen, phone in one hand, a luxury brochure in the other, some island development, private villas. He looked up and grinned like we shared a secret. "We should talk about expanding this," he said. "If we pool more capital, I can move faster." I studied him, his eyes bright with hunger, his tone rehearsed. I didn't recognize this version of him, or maybe I finally did. "How much more are you asking for?" I said. "As much as you'll give," he replied. I said nothing, just turned and walked out, notebook tucked against my chest. Once inside my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, stared at the same page for several minutes, then finally wrote what I hadn't let myself admit until now. He doesn't see me at all. Only the money. I chose the moment carefully. Sunday afternoon when the house was quiet again, stripped of caterers and music and strangers who mistook noise for meaning. The bay lay flat and glassy beyond the windows. Ethan sat at the dining table with his laptop open, scrolling, while Sarah arranged fresh flowers in a vase like nothing in the world could bruise her. "Sit down," I said. They both looked up, surprised by the tone more than the words. Ethan closed his laptop halfway. "What's going on?" "All of us," I replied, "together." Sarah took the seat beside him, folding her legs elegantly, hands resting in her lap, the picture of composure. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse, I simply spoke. "I know about the offshore proposal. I've seen the documents, and I know the money I entrusted to you isn't being handled the way we agreed." Ethan scoffed, a short laugh meant to disarm. "You went through my files?" I looked where my name was signed. His jaw tightened. "You're misunderstanding things. That's just preliminary modeling, nothing finalized." "Then why wasn't I told?" "Because you wouldn't get it," he snapped, then caught himself. "No. Offense, Mom, but this is high-level strategy." Sarah leaned in slightly, voice smooth. "Ethan's just trying to maximize potential. You wanted him to grow the money." "With integrity," I said. Ethan rolled his eyes. "You're being dramatic." That word, dramatic, hung in the air, heavy and dismissive. I looked at him, really looked, and felt something inside me finally detach. "This isn't about money anymore," I said. "It's about who you've become." He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "I've become successful. That's what you wanted, isn't it?" "No," I said quietly. "I wanted you to be decent." Sarah sighed, standing now too, placing a hand on his arm as if to steady him and to position herself between us. "Charlotte, please, you're tired. You've been under a lot of stress. Let's not turn this into something it doesn't need to be." "It already is," I replied. Ethan shook his head, pacing. "You come into my house, question my work, dig through my files." "I came looking for my son," I said, "and I don't know where he is." Silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, the final kind. I saw it then, clearly. Not just the greed or the lies, but the absence, the lack of warmth, of reflexive care. This wasn't a phase. This was the architecture of who they were. "I think you should leave this to us," Sarah said softly. "Let Ethan do what he does best." That was the moment. Not anger, not heartbreak, acceptance. "I will," I said. Ethan stopped pacing. "You will what?" "I'll step back." He relaxed instantly, mistaking surrender for trust regained. "Good, that's for the best." I nodded once and left the room. That night I called Clara. "I confronted them," I said. "And?" "They don't see anything wrong." Clara exhaled slowly. "Then you need to move carefully. Protect yourself. Protect what matters." "I am," I said. "I've already started." By morning, I'd booked a private appointment downtown. By afternoon, I'd made copies of documents Ethan didn't know I'd accessed. And by evening, I stood in the guest room, suitcase open again. But this time, it wasn't symbolic. This time, it was preparation. Downstairs, Ethan laughed at something Sarah said. The sound carried up the stairs, hollow and bright. I zipped the bag shut and felt no hesitation, only clarity. The law firm smelled like old wood and certainty. Clara met me in the private conference room, her tablet open, a pen already in hand. She'd worn navy today, a color she reserved for unshakable business. No warmth, no hesitation. We were past that now. "Are you ready?" she asked. I nodded. We reviewed every clause, every revision. The language was airtight, deliberately unkind in its precision. Ethan and Sarah were removed as beneficiaries. Every reference to descendants was replaced with designated entities. I left no room for loopholes, no ambiguity for Ethan to lawyer his way through. Instead, I created a new trust, the Winters Foundation, built to support widows, women over 60, and survivors of family exploitation, fully funded, fully protected. "It's done," Clara said, lifting her eyes from the screen. I stared at the final page, my signature freshly inked. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like release. I left without telling them. No note, no goodbye. Just silence and a made bed. It was only 2 days later that Ethan showed up, unannounced, disheveled, panicked in a way that felt rehearsed. I opened the door of the small suite I'd rented in Coconut Grove, a place so unlike his world, it felt like stepping back into my own skin. No marble, no house manager, just lemon trees outside and a creaking ceiling fan overhead. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk." I stepped aside, let him in. He paced immediately, hands in his hair, sighing dramatically like a man trying to summon guilt he didn't really feel. "Look, I'm sorry," he began, "for everything. I've been under pressure, and maybe I didn't see how hurt you were." I said nothing. He kept going. "I never meant to make you feel like you don't matter. Of course you matter. You're my mother, and I want to fix this." Still, I said nothing. I watched him squirm in the silence. Then his eyes flicked, just briefly, to the folder on my table. Legal-sized, unlabeled. He noticed it the way a predator smells blood. "What's that?" "Nothing for you," I said quietly. He blinked. "You changed it, didn't you?" I didn't respond. Ethan took a step closer, his voice now lower, more desperate. "Mom, come on, don't let this spiral. Don't let something temporary define everything we've built." "You mean everything I built?" His mouth opened, then shut. I stepped forward and handed him a single envelope. Inside, a notarized letter, one he couldn't contest. His hands trembled as he read. When he finished, he looked up at me like a child who'd just been grounded by a stranger. "You really did it," he whispered. "I really did," I said. Sarah came the next morning, not to the suite, but to the cafe next door. She found me on the patio sipping an espresso and reading The New Yorker, as if betrayal could be softened with almond pastries. She sat across from me without asking, wore white again, always white. "You've made a mistake," she said, crisp and kind, like she was pointing out a lipstick smudge. No, I replied. I corrected one. She reached across the table, fingers grazing the sleeve of my sweater. You're not thinking long-term. These things create headlines, damage reputations. Ethan can fix this. We can fix this. Fix what? I asked. Your inheritance? Sarah's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. It's not about the money. Then why are you here? She didn't answer. I stood, left her with the untouched espresso I'd ordered for her. Back in my room, I sat by the window and watched the sun set low over Biscayne Bay. Gold softened to ash, the day exhaling its final breath. I opened my notebook, the same one that had carried the early outlines of a mother's desperation, and turned to the back. There, in simple script, I wrote, I've changed, and that's the part they'll never undo. They thought it was temporary. That was the lie they clung to, the idea that I'd cool off, that time would sand down my resolve and restore things to the shape they preferred. They mistook my quiet for confusion, my distance for weakness. The confrontation came in daylight, sharp and unavoidable. Ethan cornered me outside Clara's office downtown, the glass tower reflecting a Miami sky too bright for the fury on his face. He'd lost the polished calm he used like armor. This was raw now, desperate. You don't get to do this, he said, stepping into my path. You don't get to erase me. I didn't stop walking. I didn't erase you. I saw you clearly. He laughed, bitter. You cut me out of everything, after all I've done. For yourself, I said. He grabbed my arm, not hard, but enough to remind me he thought he still had leverage. I'm your son, he said. That money is mine by blood. I turned then, slowly, deliberately. Money doesn't recognize blood, only signatures. His face drained. Inside the conference room, Clara slid a folder across the table, thicker than the last one, final. This is the executed version, she said, filed and sealed. Ethan lunged for it, flipping pages, scanning numbers, names, clauses. His breathing turned uneven. This isn't possible, he whispered. There has to be something, a contingency, a remainder clause. There isn't, I said. Sarah arrived late, breathless, eyes sharp with calculation. She took one look at the papers and adjusted instantly. Charlotte, she said softly, pulling out a chair like we were negotiating a peace treaty. Let's not scorch the earth. I didn't, I replied. I reclaimed it. She leaned in. We can make this easier, quieter. I know people, PR people, lawyers. You don't want your name dragged through speculation. I met her gaze. Is that an offer? A solution, she said. You deserve peace. I smiled then, not kindly, not cruelly, honestly. You keep offering peace like a bribe, I said. Peace isn't something you negotiate after betrayal. Ethan slammed the table. So that's it? You're just done? Yes. The word landed with finality. No tremor, no regret. Sarah's mask cracked. You'll regret this, she said. People will turn. They always do. I'm counting on it, I replied. The first article appeared 3 days later. Not a scandal piece, not gossip, a feature. Charlotte Winters launches 50 Memler's Foundation to protect women from financial exploitation. My name wasn't buried in fine print. It was the headline. By the end of the week, there were interviews, invitations, emails from women I'd never met, telling me my decision gave them courage, gave them language for something they'd endured in silence. Ethan's calls went unanswered. His messages grew shorter, sharper, then stopped altogether. Sarah tried once more. An email this time, perfectly written, perfectly hollow. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat with Clara in my suite, laptop open, watching the media tracker light up. Are you prepared for what comes next? She asked. I am, I said. They believed I'd protect them at any cost. And now? Now they learned the cost had a limit. A knock came at the door, a courier, an envelope marked confidential. Inside was a proposal, a major publisher, national distribution, working title bolded at the top of the page. When blood fails, a mother's reckoning. I closed the folder and looked out at the bay, sunlight dancing on water that never kept secrets. They thought the lie would hold. They were wrong. It started with a segment on a morning show. A calm anchor with perfectly parted hair introduced me as the Miami widow who turned her betrayal into a blueprint. Behind her, my photo flashed, me seated on the bayfront patio in navy, not smiling, just still, resolute. Within 24 hours, my inbox tripled in volume. Letters poured in, emails, handwritten notes, even a few calls forwarded by Clara's office. Women, men, even adult children estranged from parents. They shared their own private reckonings, their own quiet betrayals. I wasn't alone, and neither were they. My face was on magazine covers I never expected to grace. Forbes, The Atlantic, Vanity Fair, not for fashion, not for philanthropy, for truth. Ethan's name began to fray in headlines. SEC investigating South Florida investor in alleged shell game scheme. Ethan Winters under scrutiny. Where did the money go? At first he tried to play it cool, spin control, legal threats, denials wrapped in charm. But charm doesn't survive audit trails. One by one, his partners distanced themselves. Meetings were canceled, phones went silent. Eventually, even his LinkedIn vanished, deleted in what must have been a panicked click of resignation. I heard through Clara that he'd sold the boat first, then the second property, then the wine. Sarah's unraveling came slower, more performative. Her social media became a carousel of carefully curated apologies, thin smiles, captions about forgiveness and healing. One post featured a Bible verse, another a photo of her hugging a friend at a charity gala. But the comments told the real story. This you? No accountability, just rebranding. You lived off her and now you're milking sympathy? She turned off the comments after a week. Then she disappeared from public view entirely. I imagined her at some gated spa sipping detox water, screaming into her lavender-scented pillow. I didn't celebrate. I got to work. The Winters Foundation expanded rapidly, funded by what was once meant to feed ego, now repurposed to nourish dignity. Emergency grants, legal aid, housing stipends, support groups, counseling. We were helping women leave coercive homes, helping grandmothers fight financial abuse by adult children, helping others find the clarity it had taken me 65 years to claim. The stories were all different, but the root? The same rot. One crisp morning, I stood outside an unmarked brick building in Little Havana, the air tinged with the smell of fresh espresso and salt. In my hand was the deed for the next chapter, a community center. Not under my name, but under his. The Daniel Winters house, my late husband, my only true partner. He died young, too young to see how this family would twist in his absence. But I wanted something in the world to bear his name without shame, a place untouched by legacy games or blood-fueled entitlement. I walked the space that afternoon with Clara, concrete floors, exposed brick, potential in every echo. He would have loved this, she said. I nodded. He believed in service, not spectacle. You're honoring the right part of the past. I'm building a better future. She smiled. You're not just cleaning the slate, Charlotte. You're rewriting the whole story. I looked down at the blueprint in my hand, scribbled with notes, revisions, careful planning, and for the first time in months, I felt peace move through me. It was quiet, steady, earned. Back at the suite, a stack of mail waited. One envelope stood out, cream-colored, thick, with gold edging. No return address. Inside, a handwritten invitation. Keynote speaker. Invitation. Women of Courage Summit, Washington, D.C. Below it, the final line. We believe your story has the power to free others. I set the invitation down beside my notebook and ran my fingers over the worn leather cover. My story was no longer a secret. It was a signal fire, and they, Ethan and Sarah, were just beginning to feel the heat. The first apology came wrapped in PR gloss. Ethan's assistant emailed Clara requesting a quiet, restorative sit-down to explore potential healing and shared future values. It read like a ceasefire drafted by a lawyer. No admission, no warmth, just bullet points. I didn't reply. 2 days later, he sent a handwritten note. "Mom, I've made mistakes. I got lost. But I haven't stopped loving you, and I know there's still time to fix this. Please call me. Let me come to you. E." I folded it in half and slid it into a drawer I never opened again. He didn't want to fix what mattered. He wanted back into the story, back into the money, back into the spotlight I'd built from my own ruin. But I'd learned the difference between remorse and regret. Remorse changes you. Regret wants you to forget. I kept building. My days filled with board meetings and community dinners, grant reviews and interviews with survivors who reminded me over and over that truth had gravity, that once it took root, it pulled others into its orbit. I spoke in small rooms, then bigger ones, from Miami libraries to DC panels. One evening, I gave a TED Talk. 15 minutes, no notes. Just me on a red circle, explaining what it meant to trust the wrong people with your heart and how to take it back. Afterward, a woman in her 70s hugged me so hard my ribs ached. She whispered, "I stayed quiet for 40 years. You helped me break that silence." That was worth more than all the portfolios I'd ever built. Sarah's letter came in the mail. Real mail. Pale blue envelope. Faint perfume that clung to the page. "Charlotte, I think about you every day. I know I failed you, not just with the money, but with who I became beside it. I let ambition turn me into someone I don't recognize. You once said peace can't be bought. I'm not asking for peace anymore, just a chance to say I'm sorry, in person. If not for me, then maybe for Ethan. He's not well. He's unraveling. Please, Sarah." I sat with it for a while, let the words settle. Then I lit a match and watched them turn to ash on a porcelain dish Clara had given me. White smoke curled to the ceiling and vanished. Nothing left but gray dust and finality. Word reached me that Ethan and Sarah had separated, not in an official press release, not in a headline, but through someone I knew at a private bank in Coral Gables who'd overheard Sarah moving assets into a trust. Her name only. The great machine they'd built together was rusting at the seams. Clara texted me that night. Divorce lawyers, both sides. I didn't feel triumphant, just free. Weeks passed. I found myself mentoring a young woman named Yvette, a sharp, soft-spoken nonprofit manager whose brother had siphoned her late mother's life insurance. We met once a week. She took notes with fierce energy, eyes burning with the need to reclaim her name. "You never seem angry," she said one day. "How did you stop being angry?" I thought about it for a long time. Then I answered, "I didn't stop. I just redirected it into something that lasts longer than pain." She nodded slowly, understood. One afternoon, I walked alone through a quiet exhibit at the Perez Art Museum. Photographs of families fractured by inheritance battles, captured in stunning black and white. In one corner, a short film played on loop. I stood watching until the gallery closed. Outside, the bay wind hit my face like absolution, clean, unforgiving. When I returned to the suite, another letter was waiting. Ethan again. The envelope unopened. I left it on the counter. Tomorrow, I would decide whether to burn it or keep it sealed forever. The final chapter came quietly. No fanfare, no confetti, just a cursor blinking on a screen and a soft exhale through my nose as I hit save. When blood fails, manuscript complete. Clara had read every word. She called it surgical. I called it survival. The publisher said it was blistering in its restraint. I took that as a compliment. I'd written it not for them, not for Ethan or Sarah or the people who whispered at cocktail parties in Coral Gables, but for the woman I used to be, the one who doubted her instincts, the one who kept making allowances, the one who thought silence was strength. She deserved to be heard. The memoir's release date was set for spring. Marketing teams prepped press kits. Excerpts were embargoed and buzzed about in insider newsletters. One magazine described it as part legal drama, part maternal reckoning, wholly unforgettable. I didn't care about the blurbs. What mattered were the women who stopped me at airports, the daughters who wrote me from college dorms, the widows who showed up to book signings with trembling hands and decades of buried rage. I knew their faces now. I remembered their stories. Ethan tried again. Clara forwarded me a cease and desist letter from a boutique firm in Brickell. They claimed the manuscript defamed his character, that certain recollections were inaccurate, that he had a right to protect his reputation. I told her to file it under fiction. Sarah made a quieter move, a podcast interview, all soft lighting and carefully broken voice. She was like a mother to me, she said. And yes, we lost our way, but I still believe forgiveness is possible. She looked into the camera like she was staring at me. I clicked out of the video and opened a different tab. Final interior proofs for the book. Each page better than the last. Each paragraph a brick in the wall I'd built between me and the people who thought legacy was owed, not earned. I spent more time alone, not lonely, just alone. It was a new skill, like learning to swim without reaching for the wall. I found comfort in mundane things again, arranging cut flowers, restocking pantry shelves, folding towels just the way I used to when Daniel was alive. Grief had its place, finally. It didn't cloud, it clarified. And peace, I discovered, wasn't something you achieve. It was something you decide. A reporter called one morning, breathless with urgency. "You've seen the headline, right?" "No," I said, pouring coffee. She read it aloud. "The ultimate betrayal. How a Florida mother exposed a multi-million-dollar family fraud and took back her power." The subhead was even better. She gave him everything. Then she took it all back and built something better. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I laughed. Full, deep, real. Later that evening, I returned to the suite and saw it. Still waiting. Ethan's envelope. Unopened. Unmoved. I picked it up and weighed it in my hand. Heavier than I. Remembered. Maybe a letter. Maybe a last-ditch plea. Maybe just words he needed to write more than I needed to read. The choice was mine now. I set it down. Not in fire, not in a drawer, but on a shelf beside my manuscript. Let it sit there, unread, unimportant. A symbol, not a thread. That was the final choice. Not whether to forgive, but whether to let their voices matter anymore. I took a deep breath, opened my laptop, and typed one final line, an inscription for the book's first edition. To the ones who mistook my silence for surrender. You built my fire. I only chose where to burn. The second printing sold out in 3 days, not because of hype, but because it mattered. When Blood Fails was no longer a book, it was a mirror, a reckoning. People didn't just read it, they handed it off to sisters, mothers, daughters, highlighted passages, dog-eared pages, wrote letters, cried. One woman mailed me a snapshot of her kitchen counter. Beside a half-finished cup of tea sat my memoir, open to chapter 11, and a stack of divorce papers. In her note, she wrote, "You helped me find the exit door I kept pretending didn't exist. That was the moment I understood what legacy really meant." My face appeared on the cover of Time under a headline that made me smile for its brutal simplicity. The matriarch who walked away. There were interviews, panels, a docuseries pitched by an indie filmmaker from Austin, quiet, sharp, reverent. She'd read the memoir twice, and her voice cracked when she said, "I see my mother in every paragraph." I gave her the rights without hesitation. No Hollywood rewrites, no softened lines. She promised me it would be real. Ethan and Sarah? They dissolved. Not in a single scandal, but in the slow erosion of relevance, like monuments to causes no one believed in anymore. Sarah attempted a rebrand, launched a wellness brand for grieving women of wealth. It failed within a quarter. Her Instagram page became a ghost town of aspirational slogans and dried flower arrangements. She still smiled in every post, but the comments had gone quiet, like no one was listening anymore. Ethan stayed silent. Occasionally, I'd see his name in a court docket summary or buried in a lawsuit footnote. He no longer called. No more letters, no cease and desists, just absence. And for the first time, it felt like peace. I bought a small home inland tucked beneath sprawling oaks and Spanish moss. Nothing grand, nothing curated, just space, a garden, a porch swing. Neighbors waved without expectation. I learned their names, brought over peach cobbler in tin foil, hosted book club with women who didn't care what I used to own, only what I'd lived through. I walked barefoot more often, wore my late husband's shirts around the house, learned to cook for one, and found I liked it. One afternoon, I sat in my backyard, paperback in hand, the warm hum of life soft and easy around me. Yvette stopped by, now running her own organization for survivors of inheritance fraud. She brought her daughter this time, quiet, bright-eyed, full of questions. "Are you the Charlotte Winters?" she whispered. I nodded, smiling. "Only on Tuesdays." She laughed like a bell and asked me to sign a copy of my book for her middle school teacher. Yvette leaned over as her daughter played with the dog and said, "You save more people than you'll ever meet." I squeezed her hand. "So will you." The Daniels house had expanded into 3 more cities. Each one stood as proof. Healing could be built. Not theorized, not pitied. Built. Brick by brick, grant by grant, truth by stubborn, glorious truth. My name was etched into the cornerstones, but it was Daniel's name that stood above every entrance, because he had believed in me when I didn't yet believe in myself. And because some stories deserve to be rewritten in kindness, not just survival. The sun dipped low one evening, casting long golden shadows across my desk. I opened a parcel from the publisher. Inside, the 3rd printing, with a new foreword. Clara had written it without telling me. Her last line read, "Charlotte didn't just walk away, she walked forward and gave the rest of us permission to follow." I closed the book gently, set it on my shelf beside the first edition, beside the old notebook, beside a ceramic dish with nothing left to burn. The wind picked up outside, rattling the wind chimes. I stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, blanket over my shoulders. I had chosen this life, every word, every silence, every no, and tomorrow I'd choose it again. It rained the morning of the gala, a soft, steady Florida drizzle that misted the windows and muted the world. I stood at the sink, slicing lemons for tea, barefoot, content. The dog, an old rescue named Ruthie, snored at my feet. The radio played Ella Fitzgerald low enough to feel like memory. It was the kind of morning I never had when I was rich the first time. Clara arrived at 10 sharp, as always, carrying 2 garment bags and a knowing grin. "Tonight's the big one," she said, hanging the dresses like offerings across the bedroom door. "National Women's Alliance, Lifetime Impact Award." I raised an eyebrow. "Lifetime already? You've lived more than most of us ever will." I wore the black one. No sequins, no shimmer. Just clean lines and quiet power. Clara added a brooch. Daniel's. A modest silver compass he once wore on his lapel when things got overwhelming. "To remind you," she said, pinning it gently, "you never lost your way." The ballroom was gold and candlelit. The kind of place that once made me feel small, now it just felt temporary, like all glitz does. Yvette sat at our table, glowing in navy, her daughter beside her in a dress she said made her feel like a judge. I told her that was exactly the energy I wanted in the room. The air buzzed with energy and fine linen, but none of it clung to me. I floated through it, unburdened. whole. When they called my name, the applause rose like a tide. I walked to the podium slowly, deliberately, every step rooted in years of pain I'd turned into something useful. The host handed me the award, a crystal figure of a woman with her arms raised mid-stride. I held it steady and looked out at the crowd. "I'm honored," I said, "but not because I'm standing here." I let the silence hold. "I'm honored because of what it took to get here, and who I had to leave behind." That brought the hush I wanted, the kind that comes not from drama, but recognition. I thought betrayal would destroy me, but it handed me a pen, and I rewrote everything. They stood when I finished. Some clapped, some wiped tears. One woman mouthed "thank you" from the back row. Later I wandered to the garden outside, needing air. The night was cool, the rain gone, stars blinking through gaps in the clouds. I sat on a bench alone, the award still in my lap. A soft voice behind me. "You made it." Clara. I smiled without looking. I did. She sat beside me. "Did you ever think, back then, this would be your life?" "No," I said honestly. "I thought I'd be forgotten. Just another woman who gave too much and got erased for it." "But you weren't erased." "I chose not to be." News trickled in about Ethan and Sarah. Their divorce had finalized quietly. No coverage, no fanfare, just silence. He'd filed for Chapter 11 on a holding company. She'd moved to Arizona, supposedly working at a boutique real estate firm with a made-up name. They were names people no longer whispered at dinners, footnotes, ghosts. I didn't hate them. I just didn't carry them anymore. Back home, I kept things simple. Fresh flowers from the Saturday market, a full fridge, books piled high on the nightstand. My circle was small now, tight as a fist. People who didn't ask what I used to be, only how I was feeling today. One Sunday, Ruthie curled beside me on the porch swing, a gentle breeze in the air. The chimes sang their lazy rhythm. Yvette called. "We just got our first federal grant," she said. "We're going national, Charlotte." "You earned it," I said. "All of it." "You gave me the map." "No," I said. "You asked the right question." She paused. "What question?" "How do I take this pain and make sure no one else has to repeat it?" I hung up and looked out at the trees swaying against a pink horizon. There had been a time when all I had was loss. Now I had space, stillness, sanity. And in that stillness, I wrote one final line in my notebook, the same one that had carried grief, rage, and clarity. They couldn't steal my peace, but I still had one more thing to give. The documentary aired on a quiet Wednesday evening, no red carpet, no live tweets, just a nationwide PBS slot, sandwiched between a special on endangered sea turtles and a biography of a forgotten jazz pianist. It was perfect. I curled up on the couch with a quilt over my knees. Ruthie nestled against my hip, her breath slow and sure. On the coffee table, a chipped mug of chamomile. I'd turned off every light in the house except the one beside the screen. The title card bloomed in soft, serifed letters. "When Blood Fails," the Charlotte Winters story. I didn't brace myself. I'd lived it. Still, when the first image came on, a slow pan of the old estate before I left, all too manicured hedges and cold glass railings, I felt the ghost of who I'd been stir quietly in my chest. The narration was calm, measured. Clara's voice. She'd agreed only if she could read the intro herself. She was a mother, a widow, a businesswoman, a woman betrayed. But that's not the story we're telling. This is the story of what she built when no one believed she could. I didn't cry. I watched. Clips rolled. Yvette in her office, holding a framed photo of the first support group. Interviews with women who'd used our grants to escape abusive families, to sue for financial custody, to begin again. There was footage from the Daniels house in Atlanta. Kids painting a mural of women holding torches and notebooks and keys. A girl, maybe 11, said, "My mom says Charlotte Winters didn't just fix her own life, she helped fix ours." And then they showed me archival footage, clips from that first TED Talk, from the award gala, me in profile, reading at a bookshop, laughing at something Clara whispered, planting herbs behind the community center in a sun hat I hated but wore anyway. Not once did they show Ethan or Sarah. Their names were mentioned only once, in the context of what had been lost, not who they were. Even their betrayal, it seemed, had become irrelevant. The next morning, my phone lit up with quiet gratitude, messages, articles, an old friend from Chicago, a nurse I'd met once at a conference, a girl who had written to me at 16 and was now 22 and studying nonprofit law. The documentary had done what I'd hoped, not glorified, but validated. That evening, Clara called from her car, voice rich with awe. "You watched?" "I did." "Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," I said. "I'm still here." Weeks passed, and the buzz softened as all buzz does. But the ripples stayed. Donations doubled. Volunteer applications surged. We were asked to partner with schools. Libraries stocked the memoir in multiple languages. A small village in Chile named a women's shelter after me. I asked them to name it after themselves. They didn't listen. I let it be. Some things you don't fight anymore. I visited Daniel's grave one crisp afternoon, brought a thermos of tea and sat on the bench beside him, like I used to when he first passed, when the quiet was unbearable. Now it was kind. I told him everything, about the film, about Ruthie getting older, about Yvette's daughter writing an essay titled My Real Hero and choosing me over Beyoncé. I told him I was proud, of him, of me, of what we'd survived, separately and somehow still together. Before I left, I set a folded note at the base of the headstone. We built something they'll never break. One morning, I caught a headline while checking the weather. A legacy of courage. How one woman's fight changed family law. It wasn't about me by name. That was the best part. It was about the ripple. The wave I'd started by choosing not to stay quiet. The piece they tried to steal had become something larger than me. It had become movement. Back home, I sat at my desk, the sun casting light through the shutters. The final edition of the memoir sat open beside a bowl of fruit. Ruthie snored in the corner. The garden buzzed beyond the glass. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Not for a book, not for the press, just a letter. To no one. To everyone. Peace, I wrote, isn't what happens after the storm. It's what you choose to plant in the silence that follows. I signed it simply, Charlotte. And for once, I didn't need an ending. Just the quiet and the knowing that they'd never take this from me.